All right, I do believe you're on. If you would, go ahead and turn your Bibles to the book of Exodus, chapter 12. We are going to study the Passover. Exodus chapter 12. We're going to look at the Passover. We just finished a series called The Gospel in Genesis, and it was really my intention to start again 1 Corinthians. Fully intended to do that. In fact, I even started to develop an outline for tonight's study. But from, I guess, about Monday morning, I believe God was putting this on my heart, and I kept trying to talk him out of it. And he wins again, and so finally gave up and said, okay, I'll just teach on the Passover. And so this is kind of like the Gospel in Exodus. Didn't intend to do that, but that's kind of what it's like. Now, if you study the Passover, I think you might be surprised to put some stuff together that you might have passed over, overlooked. Hopefully, maybe connect some dots that you haven't connected before when we look at the Passover, particularly how it relates to prophecy. That is Jesus, who is our Passover. We'll clearly see that. I'm not making that up. And we'll look at some things, some details that we might overlook if we didn't kind of place them in its proper context as it relates to Jesus. Hopefully we'll bear some of that out. But we're going to kind of establish a little foundation for the Passover. And some of this you'll probably already know. And just bear with me. But we're going to have to make sure that we're familiar with the foundation before I start building on top of it. And I don't want to leave anybody behind. In case you haven't already laid that foundation previously to the study. We want to make sure that we're already there, then we can kind of start building on top of that. In Exodus chapter 12 is obviously the Passover. Now, to get you into the context of chapter 12, most of you already know, I'm sure, that Egypt is in bondage. And God has been at war with Pharaoh and the Egyptian deities. And he has by way of plagues, been causing a great deal of suffering to the Egyptian people. And then finally, at the last straw, God sent the destroyer and overnight to kill all the firstborns. And that is obviously going to cause the Egyptian, or the Pharaoh, to allow them to go, leave, and God's going to take them to the place that God had promised Abraham many, many years prior, and that is the land of Canaan, to be their land. And so we are right at the dawn of that happening, where God is going to give instructions to the Israelites on how they are to address this Passover so they themselves don't come under the destroyer. And so that's what we're looking at in chapter 12, and starting in verse 1. And I'm going to be doing a lot of talking, and we're going to be doing a lot of reading. So I'm going to divvy up that reading, if you don't mind, and allow someone to read for me verses 1 through 7.
While the Israelites were still in the land of Egypt, the Lord gave the following instructions to Moses and Aaron. From now on, this month will be the first month of the year for you. Announce to the whole community of Israel on the 10th day of this month, each family must choose a lamb or a young goat for sacrifice, one animal for each household. If a family is too small to eat a whole animal, let them share with another family in the neighborhood. Divide the animal according to the size of each family and how much they can eat. The animal you select must be a 1-year-old male, either a sheep or goat with no defects. Take special care of this chosen animal until the evening of the 4th day of this first month. Then the whole assembly of the community of Israel must slaughter their lamb or young goat at twilight. They are to take some of the blood and smear on the sides of the top of the door frames of the houses where they eat the animal. Sorry, my back is different.
Yeah, I'm making sure that we finish verse 7.
Make sure we were reading from the same.
Yeah, that's okay. No, that's perfectly fine. I think everyone can follow along decently. So we're going to, I'm going to challenge your reading comprehension or listening skills. I want you to tell me some of the characteristics that were involved with the selecting of this lamb that was to be sacrificed for the Passover.
No blemish.
It could not have a blemish. What's a blemish?
I've got a couple right here.
Yeah, see, Brother Brad's got a big blemish on his forehead.
Had to be a male.
Had to be a male.
Had to be 1 year old.
Had to be 1 year old. What else?
You had to take special care of it.
Okay. Some more stuff in there. It specifically states that it has to be selected among the herd. So it couldn't be, by way of UPS or anything like that.
The sheep and the goats.
It had to be according to the size of your household.
That's right. Yeah, so if your family wasn't capable of eating an entire lamb or goat, then you were to get with another family and share it among a big enough crowd. What else? There were certain dates or days that were determined in the choosing of this lamb. And what were those days?
It'll be on the 14th day of the month.
That's when it was to be sacrificed.
The 10th day.
And on the 10th day it was to be selected out of the herd. All right, so on the 10th day it was to come and dwell with the people who were about to eat it. And then on the 14th, or that was on the 10th day, then on the 14th day of that month, which is the month Abib or Nicene, depending on if you're using Hebrew or Aramaic, that was going to be the first month of the year for Israel, and we're going to see that. But on that particular month, on the 10th day, they were to take that animal to their home, and then on the 14th day, that was to be sacrificed. Okay, does everyone follow that? Okay, and
Twilight.
at twilight, yeah, it's supposed to be at twilight. Now, I'm going to get into twilight. I'm not going to get into it yet, but it's a bit of controversy. But I'm going to tell you how the Hebrews interpret that. Probably a little bit different than you might have heard it interpreted in the past. But we're going to look at some other surrounding verses before I get to that. Is there anything else that anyone brings out of that? You've covered my notes, but just in case, someone has something else they wanted to bring out. All right, with that, will someone read verses 8 through 13 for me? Or verse 8 through 12, excuse me.
And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not it of raw, nor sodden it all with water, but roast with fire his head with his legs, and with the puritance thereof. And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning. And that whence remaineth of it until the morning you shall burn with fire. And thus shall you eat it, with your loins girded, with your shoes on your feet, and with your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover.
Okay, so now this was the actual meal. So we talked about the lamb, the choosing of the lamb, the sacrificing of that lamb. Now we're actually looking at the meal itself. And what are some of the things that were required in this meal?
Don't eat it raw.
Can't eat it raw.
You had to eat it
What else?
using your staff in your hand.
You had to eat it in haste.
Had to be roasted.
It had to be roasted. So not only could you not eat it raw, but you couldn't boil it either. That's what sodden with water means. You couldn't boil it. It had to be roasted with fire. Okay, what else?
Got to have the head and the legs together.
The whole body. It's all going into the fire.
And the innards.
In the inward parts. And the entrails. Yeah, all of it has to go into the fire. What else?
You eat all of it.
You had to eat it all. None of it could remain. And if anything remained, then what did they do with it?
Burn it.
They burned it. Nothing can remain in the morning. Is there anything else?
You eat it with unleavened bread and with bitter.
That's right. They had to eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. So this will start the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and we'll look at that later too. But the Passover is the beginning point to a 7-day feast. And that 7-day feast, they're not able to eat anything that's leavened at all during that 7-day feast. And we'll look at that more in detail later. Very good. Anything else? It's all pretty basic, but we're going to build on this. We're going somewhere with it. All right, if someone would read verses 13 through 17.
And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see...
I passed over 12, didn't I? Did we read through 12?
Read 12, wait.
Yeah, read through verse 12. I'm sorry.
For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be upon you to to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. Even the first day shall ye put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in the first day there shall be an holy convocation, and in the 7th day there shall be an holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. And ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever.
All right, what do we read?
For the firstborn is going to be killed in each home.
If what? Unless what? Yeah.
Unless there's blood on them.
All right, and how were they supposed to handle that blood? They would take the blood and they would do what with it?
Token. What was a token?
It was a token. But what were they supposed to do with that blood? They would put it all across the doorpost. Anyone who did not have the blood on the doorpost, what would happen? The firstborn would die. What else did we read?
Whenever the Lord sees the blood, he will pass over.
You will pass over them. Very good.
You're supposed to remember it forever.
You're supposed to do it forever.
It'll be a plague.
It's a plague.
If you eat unleavened bread, you shall be cut off from Israel.
That is correct.
For,
Very good.
that was for 7 days.
What about the holy convocations? What's a holy convocation? What is that? Just a big word?
Like a meeting?
It's an observance. It's a special observance. And there's 2 special observances that they were to honor by way of rest. It was a Sabbath day. The Sabbath day would begin immediately following the eating of the Passover. The very next day would be a Sabbath day, a rest. Then at the end of the 7th day would also be a day of rest. Y'all put all that together? So Passover enters into a day of rest. Then you have following, 4 days, or regular days, and then on the 7th day, or 5 days, and then on the 7th day, then there would be another Sabbath. Everybody there? All right. And then if someone would read, let's see, 18 through 28. It's a lot of reading. There are 10 verses, but I'm sure one of you can do it.
18 through what?
28. So the rest of the, well, it's not the rest of the chapter, but verse 28.
In the first month of the 14th day of the month at evening you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For several days no leavened bread shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Whether he is a stranger or a native of the land, you shall not eat leavened bread. In all your dwelling you shall eat unleavened bread. Then Moses called for the elders of Israel and said to them, pick out and take land for yourself according to your families, and kill the Passover. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop.
Hyssop.
Sorry, don't drink the water. No.
Contaminated.
It's the
Poison.
You see what it did to Brad's head.
It's the plague.
sorry. I made tea. It's boiled, so there's
Okay.
tea. Sorry for interrupting. Just
You're fine.
don't drink the water.
Dip it in the blood that is in the basin and strike the lintel and the 2 doorposts which the blood that is in the basin has
I don't know where you're on. I lost my place. Basin.
Basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of this house until morning. For the Lord will pass through the flock of Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and not allow the destroyers to come into your house and smite you. And you shall observe this thing in the ordinance for you and your sons forever. It will come to pass when you come to the land of the Lord will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep his service. And you shall be when the children say in you, what do you mean by the service? What you shall say is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt. He struck the Egyptians and delivered our household. So the people bowed their heads and worshipped. Then the children of Israel went away and did so, just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did.
All right, very good. Thank you. All right, so what do we pick out of that? What are some of the more requirements we're given about the Passover?
Don't drink the water? No.
Or you'll get a plague on your head. What else?
The Jews were to keep that forever as a reminder.
That was to be a reminder. And who was it to be observed in front of? Specifically made mention that this would be observed in front of
Children.
Children, that's right, children. To remind them of what God had done for them in Egypt. What else? Let's say that I killed the lamb. I ate the lamb, but I didn't take the blood and put it on the doorpost. What would have happened? I'd been destroyed. Okay, let's say that, or before sperm had been destroyed. Yeah. Let's say that, okay, I killed the lamb, I took the blood, I put it on the doorpost, I went in and I ate the lamb, but right before morning, maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, I decided I want to go for a stroll, walk around the neighborhood. What would happen? What would happen? Yeah, so part of the requirements is I had to stay in the house. I could not leave. You had to stay in the house, eat the lamb, anything that remains, burn it up. The blood has to be on the doorpost. So there was all kinds of requirements that were involved with the Passover. And God is telling them specifically, step by step, what they had to do. And if any of that was not done, the firstborn would have been destroyed. Okay, so we're going to build on this, but it kind of lay in the foundation of what we're going to be looking at in the rest of the verses. Okay? And we know that the destroyer did come, killed all the firstborns in Egypt. It says not a single Egyptian son was alive. Or the firstborn was not alive. And they said, get out of here. In fact, they gave them all their stuff, jewels and clothing and all kinds of things to get them out. They were ready for them to go. I would have been ready for them to go at frogs. But it took several plagues to finally let Pharaoh let them go. And they were thrilled at their leaving. And so they're finally leaving. They go off into the wilderness. Now, the book of what we call the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is kind of a complicated book because it's a mix of historical narrative and law. And sometimes it's difficult to place the law in relation to the history that is given. And so I'm going to try to help smooth a little bit of that out, and so we can kind of understand historically where the Israelites were in relation to the journey through the wilderness. That's important so that we can keep up with what God is requiring for them to do with the Passover, because we're going to build on and add more information that's outside of this initial or original law given to the Passover. And there's my wife. The next, we're going to stare at her.
Come on in, come on in.
Isn't she pretty? So the next time we read about the Passover is later, after they leave. They go from Egypt and they make it all the way to Sinai. In fact, you can go ahead and turn your Bibles to Exodus chapter 23. We're going to eventually read there, but I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of what's unfolding there. They make it to, I know they tell me that it's Sinai. I just can't bring myself to call it Sinai. It's always going to be Sinai to me. But they make it to this mountain where something very important happens for the Israelites. And what was that? Well, eventually we'll get to the worshiping of the golden calf. But what? The law is given to them. The laws. In fact, but we think of Mount Sinai, we think of 10 commandments, right? But all of the commandments, all the way through Numbers 14, is all given to us at Sinai. And not a lot of people have captured that and then put that together. They think they made it to Sinai, God gave them the 10 commandments, and then they kind of moved on and God gave them various commandments as they were kind of roaming around. But that's not the case at all. They stayed at Sinai during all this time. The next revelation of the Passover comes while they are camped at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 23. And if someone would read verses 14 through 19 for me, we'll see what it adds to it.
3 times you shall keep a feast to me in the year. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded you at the time appointed in the month of Abib. For in it you came out of Egypt, none shall appear before me empty. Now we can sit down. And the feast of harvest, the first fruits of your labors, which you have sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering, at the end of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field. 3 times in the year, all your males shall appear before the Lord God. You say 8?
No, you can stop there. Okay, so now what has God added to the requirements? Now we already read that God is going to require them to continue to keep the Passover annually when they get into the land. But now He's kind of adding more to the story. And what is He adding as a requirement in relation to the Passover and 2 other feasts, by the way?
Supposed to do it 3 times a year?
What are they supposed to do 3 times a year?
They're supposed to keep a feast.
No.
Or, is that right?
They will keep 3 feasts during a year.
Oh, okay.
But they're supposed to do something specifically with those feasts. 3 separate feasts. During the year, they are to do something.
So all your males shall appear before the Lord God?
That's right. They are to go to the temple. That's the place where He'll put His name. That's eventually where that's going to lead. And we're going to look at some other verses surrounding that. But 3 times out of the year, they could not just do the feast anywhere. These feasts had to be done at the temple or the tabernacle. Okay, the place where God dwells, the dwelling place of God. Okay? These 3 feasts, we've already looked at. One of them, obviously, is the Passover. The second one is the Feast of First Fruits. That's the second feast that's mentioned. And the third one there is the Feast of Pentecost, or what they call the Feast of Gathering there. Those 2 feasts are, well, actually all the feasts, are associated around the 2 major harvests of the year. And what are the 2 major harvests of the year? Anyone know? The first in the springtime is called the barley harvest. That was the first harvest. The last, which would actually they call the major harvest, is the wheat harvest. So in the spring, the barley harvest would come up. And then in the fall, after the summer months, the wheat harvest would come. Now, I thought barley and wheat were the same thing, but they're not. They're not at all. They're both grains, but they're not the same as a wheat. Y'all may have already been well familiar with that. I am not a farmer. I did not know that. Yeah? You did not know that. Well, see, I'm not alone. All right, well, I'll help you out here. So there's a lot of harvest and gathering sheaves and gleamers in the Bible, right? And we don't do any of that. At least I don't. And so it's very difficult to follow sometimes the historical context about that information, which is very important, used quite a bit in the Bible. So I'll kind of help you along with that. All of the harvest was all sown when? In the winter. All of it sown in the winter. The first to come up would be the barley harvest. It doesn't take long for it to sprout. It sprouts up fairly quickly. In the springtime, it comes up. Okay? Then the wheat takes a lot longer, begins to develop and grow until finally in the fall it would be harvest. Now, how do they know when it's time to harvest the crop?
And it looks ready.
What does looking ready mean?
The heads are right.
Okay, well, what does that look like?
Wheat, the top drips over.
It turns white. It actually turns white. So it goes from green to white. Now, eventually it's going to go to brown. That's when we eat it.
The wheat or
the wheat. The wheat. The actual, what he was talking about, the shaft grows, it does fall over. All that was right, but it actually turns white. Okay? That's when you're white unto harvest, right? You've heard that phrase before? When you're already white unto harvest. Now, Jesus said that, don't think there's 4 months, that everyone is white unto harvest. In other words, he's saying the work is now. Go out and do the work. Right? So when it turns white, they go and they cut down the sheaves and they bind them and they take them into the barn. And in the barn is when it begins to mature longer and then it turns brown. And then from the barn they go to where? The threshing floor, right. And then at the threshing floor they do what?
Beat it.
They beat it, but what are they beating? They just beat it for fun? Yeah, they're trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, right? They're separating it so then they can go use it to break down even further and bake it. Okay, so how many of you already knew that?
That's a lot of effort to get some bread, isn't it?
It is a lot of effort. Yeah, Walmart has helped us out quite a bit. Yeah, I didn't know all of that initially. All right, so so that's kind of the deal. And so the first, which was the first fruits, is talking about the barley harvest. During this time, they are to celebrate what is called the first fruits. Then, later, when the fall comes, they celebrate the third one that's mentioned, which is the Feast of Pentecost, which is the wheat harvest. Okay, everyone okay with that?
That's 50 days after Passover, right?
That is correct. They would count 50 days from the unleavened bread, from the first of unleavened bread to Pentecost. That would be the Feast of Pentecost. All right? We're good? Okay. All right, everyone looks like they're good. Either that, you're fooling me. All right. So, when were they to celebrate the Feast of First Fruits? Well, let's look at another verse before we get into that. In Leviticus chapter 23. Again, this is all during the time when they're at Sinai.
Chapter 23.
Leviticus chapter 23.
Leviticus, right?
Leviticus. 23. And we're going to read verses 1 through 11. If someone will read that for me.
The Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, these are the Lord's appointed times, which you must proclaim as holy assemblies, my appointed times. 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day there must be a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy assembly. You must not do any work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all the places where you live. These are the Lord's appointed times, holy assemblies, which you must proclaim at their appointed time. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, as a Passover offering to the Lord. Then on the 15th day of the same month will be the festival of unleavened bread to the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. On the first day there will be a holy assembly for you. You must not do any regular work. You must present a gift to the Lord for 7 days, and the seventh day is a holy assembly. You must not do any regular work. Am I supposed to keep reading?
To 11.
To 11. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you enter the land that I am about to give to you, and you gather in its harvest, then you must bring the sheaf of the first portion of your harvest to the priest, and he must wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for your benefit. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest is to wave it."
All right. So what did we learn about as far as the first fruits is concerned from that passage? What are they to do with the barley harvest? They were to take it to the priest and they were to wave it. They would wave it in front of the temple because that's the place where they are to celebrate this. What else did we learn?
Can I ask a question here?
Yes, please.
Okay, the 14th day, the first month, is the Lord's Passover, and the 15th day is the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Correct.
Okay, that's not the Feast of First Fruits that you're talking about.
It's not. No, the immediately following the Passover would be the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, it gets confusing because once we enter into the New Testament time, they begin to separate it for clarity. And they would call the 14th day the preparation day, and then they would call the Passover the next day all the way to the end of unleavened bread. So unleavened bread and Passover kind of get grouped together, but they would call the 14th day the day of preparation. We're going to look at that. John actually calls this 14th day the day of preparation. So it gets kind of confusing as far as the terminology is concerned, but just know that on the 14th day they would take the lamb that they had selected previously, they would kill it, and we're going to get to that at evening or twilight. We're going to look at the importance of that here shortly. And then they were to cook it and eat it during the nighttime. And it could not remain until the next day, but that next day starts unleavened bread, and then it's to last for 7 days. Is everybody, everyone's there, right? Okay. So where does the first fruits fall in relation to that? That's the question. Everyone catch it?
So the grain offering is on the day of the Sabbath.
After the Sabbath. So they were to have a Sabbath, the day after the Sabbath. They would have a Sabbath, which was the first day of unleavened bread, and the very next day would be the day of first fruits. Did everyone catch that? He's absolutely right. So Passover, Sabbath, which starts the first day of unleavened bread, and then the third day would be the day that they celebrate first fruits. Everyone good there? All right, good. You seem to be there. All right. And now we're going to look here in Numbers chapter 9, if you'll turn there. Now, so again, Numbers at this point, they're still at Sinai. And it's come time now to celebrate the Passover again. And so God now is requiring them to celebrate the Passover from Mount Sinai. So if someone would read verses 1 through 14 for me.
And the Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month of the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Let the children of Israel also keep the Passover at his appointed season. In the 14th day of this month, at even, he shall keep it in his appointed season, according to all the rites of it, and according to all the ceremonies thereof, shall he keep it. And Moses spake unto the children of Israel, that they should keep the Passover. And they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month, at even, in the wilderness of Sinai, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. So did the children of Israel.
Okay, go ahead and stop there. We won't get into the next verses. I'll just kind of summarize them for you. You can go back and read them. Make sure that I'm not lying to you. But basically what happens is there were some people who were defiled and they couldn't keep the Passover. So Moses didn't know what to do. So he went to God and said, okay, what do we do? These people are defiled and they can't be defiled to do the Passover. So he then makes a makeup day for the Passover, which is the very next month on the exact same day. So the 14th day of the very next month, they could celebrate the Passover and be okay. Okay, so that's only for defilement. So it's kind of like a makeup day. Who could not fulfill the Passover. All right, so that's what we read for the rest of that. But What is interesting here is that this is kind of a really good marker as to where we are in relation to the timing of their journey in the wilderness. So in Numbers chapter 9, we're still at Mount Sinai, and we're the first month of the second year. Y'all see that? First month of the second year. That was in verse 1. Okay? Now if you look down here in chapter 10, verse 11, we're going to see that now they are about to leave. And I'll read this because I'm only going to read one verse. It says, "And it came to pass on the 20th day of the second month in the second year that the cloud was taken up from off the tabernacle of the testimony." So obviously the tabernacle has already been built. Okay, we would have read, if we had kept reading in Exodus, of its preparations and building at the very end of Exodus. Okay, so it's already been built, and now they are leaving. And when are they leaving?
The 20th day of the second month.
The 20th day of the second month in the second year. Okay, so what is this time in relation to? This is in relation to them leaving in Exodus. If you turn to Exodus 19, just keep your place there because we'll be back. We're just kind of put this together.
So the reference point is the first Passover, the initial Passover.
Them being taken when they left Egypt. So yes, that's all within the same time frame. So if you look at Exodus 19, it tells us when they arrived at Sinai. Exodus 19 verse 1, if I can get there. Okay, and it says, "In the third month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they unto the wilderness of Sinai." Okay, so they came to Sinai the third month. So from Egypt to Sinai took them 3 months to get there, right? They stayed there until the second year in the second month and the 20th day. So how long were they camped out at Mount Sinai? 11 months. Very good. I knew someone was really good with math. I knew someone was not going to be very good with math. 11 months. Very good. Now, how many of you knew that they were at Mount Sinai for 11 months? I had to go to seminary to find that out, I'll be honest with you. Yeah, 11 months they were at Sinai. So that makes sense. We have all of these things that God told Moses to do at various different times as they were camped out until he finally got to the end, and then they were ready to go. Okay, so it's not like God gave them a speed course in the law. He gave them bit by bit, little by little, as they built up to learn the law of God. So God is interested in the way He does that. Very methodical on His part. And now it's time for them to leave. Okay, now you know the story. When they left Mount Sinai, where'd they go? Close, and that's true, but where did they go to initially?
Back in the wilderness.
Okay, they did go that way. I would have taken two acceptable answers. Kadesh Barnea is the major city that they were at, but they were actually right outside of Kadesh Barnea called the wilderness of Paran. And the wilderness of Paran is where they actually camped out. And then God told them to do something when they were in the wilderness of Paran. What did He tell them to do?
Is that when they went sent scouts in?
Yeah, scouts, spies. Yeah, and the spies they were representative of the 12 tribes. So 12 spies went into the land to spy it out, right? And then what did they find? They found giants in the land, and 2 of them were like, "Let's take him." 10 of them said, like, "Let's go home," right? And so they came back. And they told the people, and the people listened to the report. Joshua and Caleb said, "It's ours to take." The other one said what? We go in, they'll kill our kids. They'll kill our children if we go, right? They played the children card. And so they really didn't obey God. They didn't believe God, not really the 2 other spies. God told them to go do it, and they didn't. And so God, in a bit of irony, marches them around in a circle in the wilderness in a 16-mile radius for 40 years. Around and around and around until that generation died off. And then who went in and took the land?
Joshua.
Their children, the ones who they were afraid that would die. Those are the ones that actually went in and took the land. And Joshua was part of that as well. Obviously, he was the great commander. And they go in there and they take the land. Now, prior to that, they're going. When they all begin to die off, God had to then reestablish the law in the next generation, right? That's what we call Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy means the second giving of the law. Deutero meaning two or second, and onomy, law, is the second giving of the law. Okay? And so in this second giving of the law, we read about the Passover again. And so if you turn to me, Deuteronomy chapter 16, we'll start to put all this together, I promise. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise you. Stick with me. If someone would read verses 1 through 8 with me, we'll really start to get the ball rolling here.
Verse 16, you said?
Chapter 16, verse 1 through 8.
Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God. For in the month of Abib, the Lord thy God brought thee out of Egypt by night. Thou shalt therefore sacrifice the Passover unto the Lord thy God, with the flock and the herd, in the place which the Lord shall choose to place his name there. Thou shalt eat no leavened bread within it. 7 days shalt thou eat unleavened bread therewith, even the bread of affliction, for thou camest out of the land of Egypt in haste, that thou mayest remember the day when thou camest forth out of the land of Egypt all the days of thy life. And there shall be no leavened bread seen with thee in all thy coast 7 days. Neither shall there anything of the flesh which thou sacrifice the first day at even remain all night until the morning. Thou mayest not sacrifice the Passover within any of thy gates which the Lord thy God giveth thee. But at the place which the Lord thy God shall choose to place his name in, there thou shalt sacrifice the Passover at even. And the going down of the sun at the season that thou camest forth out of Egypt. And thou shalt roast and eat it in the place which the Lord thy God shall choose, and thou shalt turn in the morning and go into thy tents. 6 days shalt thou eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day shall be a solemn assembly to the Lord thy God. Thou shalt do no work therein.
You can stop there, that's fine. Okay, so what did God hammer down to the Israelites in relation to or the place where they were going to do the Passover? Where were they to eat it and kill it and all of that?
Where they told him to.
Where his name was in?
Where his name was, and that is the temple. As we already read, that was the place they were required to go 3 times. One of them was the Passover. That was all to be done at the temple. Could not be done anywhere else. So no longer is it in the home. It is killed and ate at the temple. Okay? So that's different. Everyone catch that?
No more blood on the doorpost.
You caught that. It's different. So there's different rules. How many of y'all knew that? Yes. I knew I'd come up with something that y'all hadn't heard before.
I want to know how they fit the entire nation of Israel in.
We're going to look at that too. We'll get there. Alright. So it had to be at the place where God has placed his name, the temple, or the tabernacle. The tabernacle initially, and then later the temple. Is it already 8 o'clock?
I think we may have got started.
You don't have anywhere to go, do y'all? Oh man, I ain't even got to the New Testament yet. I might have to make this a 2-part message. Alright, well, we'll clarify this. This is really some neat information here. Now, we're going to look at this same phrase again. It says, at evening, and then it says, at the going down of the sun. And I'm afraid many of us have interpreted that by our Western mindset of what those words mean to our Western culture. But we really need to understand them as how an Eastern person, especially a Jewish person, would have interpreted that. And they interpret that probably different than you do. Now, when you think of being killed at evening, at the going down of the sun, what time do you think in your head?
6, 7
Depends what time of year.
Okay. That's just what my wife said. But what time, generally?
7.
Okay, 6, 7. Okay, y'all are all wrong. Y'all all made bad Jews. Yeah, y'all have all flunked. Now, the problem is you have to understand the interpretation of the Hebrew. If you understand the interpretation of the word, it actually means between the evenings. So they count 2 evenings. And between the evenings is the going down of the sun. So, at the going down of the sun marks the first evening. Now, this is how the Jewish people interpret this. This is found recorded in the Talmud. Have you ever heard of the Talmud before? What the Talmud is. Okay, the Talmud is a very interesting writings. It's basically all the writings of the Hebrew people that begin around about the time that they were in exile, and they continue to write long time. And it has all their history. It has different rabbinical interpretations of the Bible. Most of them contradict themselves. But that's what the Talmud is. It's a large volume of writing. And it's very interesting. Some of it's very neat. But that's what it is. Now, in the Talmud, this is how they have interpreted traditionally this verse. They've interpreted to kill the Passover at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, the question is, how did they get there? Why did they arrive at that? Well, they took the turning down or the going down of the sun literally. And they placed between the evenings at 3 o'clock. Now, that's how they do it. Where is the highest point of the sun in the day? What time? Noon. So then it starts to go down at noon. That's their first evening. Their second evening is 6 o'clock, during the transitional time for it to go to twilight. So they would mark the time, or in the middle of that, from noon to 6 o'clock in the evening. And what time was that? 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That is how. Now, whether you agree with that interpretation or not is irrelevant. That is how they interpret it, and it's very interesting, as we're going to see, that it relates incredibly to the New Testament, and particularly Jesus' death on the cross. And so I'm out of time, I've been told. I don't mind to continue going, but if y'all have somewhere y'all need to go, I can stop now and we can finish it later. I'm sorry, I had more information than I thought. Yeah.
How much longer do you think you got?
Probably 30 minutes.
It's up to...
It's up to y'all.
Yeah, so I'm not in a hurry.
You're not in a hurry? I'm getting a consensus to keep going. Okay, we're going to keep going. Okay. I'll try to give you the speed version of this, and I might not be able to get into every single thing I wanted to go through. I'll try to...
We want to let the little kids go on the playroom.
So let me give you a little brief history of going from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Okay? This is some interesting stuff, because the question is, okay, if the Passover had to be celebrated at the temple and killed at the temple, and then they could leave in the morning time to go back to their homes and all of that, and only the males were to show up and all that stuff, the question then, what happened during the time they were in exile? So we all know that in 922 BC, Israel split into Judah and Israel. Huh? Okay, well, it did.
Oh, I knew it split.
Yeah, it split. In 922 BC. Okay? Then about 200 years later, the Assyrians came and conquered Israel. Okay? And then Judah, in 586 BC, was defeated by Babylon. Okay? And they were in 3 different diasporas taken out of the land. And eventually Nebuchadnezzar gets so angry at the Jewish king that he destroys the temple. Okay? Destroys it. So now there's no temple, no one's in the land. Now what do? How do they celebrate the Passover? That was a dilemma they had. You want to know what they came up with? They started to celebrate the Seder meal. How many have ever heard of the Seder meal? The Seder meal is a little fancy Jewish Passover meal that when the Jews get together, they have the little tray, and they have the various different things on the little Seder, what they call a Seder dish. They have a roasted egg. They have various different bitter herbs and various things like that. It's not bothering me at all.
You sure?
I'm positive.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as it's not bothering y'all.
We're all used to it.
And so they would eat that, and they would put a lamb bone that was bare on the dish, and that symbolized the lamb. And they just anticipated that one day God would bring them back out of the land, back to the temple, and one day they would celebrate the Passover again at the temple. Okay, so that's what they would do. The Seder meal was birthed in Babylon. If you've never heard of the Seder meal, that kind of surprised me, but that's how actually a Jewish Passover done here in America would be done that way. They would not eat a lamb. They would not kill it. They would have a lamb bone, and they would eat all the other things that were like unleavened bread, what they call matzah, and various other things. Okay? If you've never never seen a Jewish Passover, you should watch it. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, okay, so that's what they did. It's called the Seder meal. Now, when they came back into Israel after the diaspora and Cyrus emancipated the Jews back into Jerusalem, they then rebuilt the temple, right? And the temple was rebuilt, and they could redo the Passover, and they began to do that. But they held on to their little tradition. They liked the little Seder meal, but they also had to obey God and go to the temple. So what they would do is that the night previously, entering into the preparation day, they would gather for a meal. That's what Jesus is doing when He gathers with His disciples. The disciples were not at all desiring to have a lamb there. They didn't say, "Where's the lamb?" Right? They didn't have the lamb there. The lamb was at the temple. But they would have this little gathering of meal that is called the Seder meal, but they would do it the night going into the preparation day. Okay? And that's what Jesus celebrated with His disciples. Then you have the actual killing of the lamb, eating of the lamb at the temple as God has required. Okay? So there's no discrepancy of when the Passover should be. Jesus was doing what was traditionally done, taken from Babylon. They were all aware that the Passover, the real Passover, was going to be the next day. Okay, so that's the history going into the New Testament. We're going to look at a few things quickly as I can, about the Passover as it relates to the New Testament. Okay? First thing that we want to see in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, Paul, writing there to the church of Corinth, says that Jesus was our Passover, crucified for us. So there's no doubt that Jesus symbolizes, at least in some way, the Passover. Enough so that Paul can use Him as a representative of a Passover. Now, it makes sense, because the Passover was a Passover lamb, right? Okay, well, God used lambs throughout the law at various times. We know the Passover, there was a lamb, of course. And then the Day of Atonement, that's a big one, right? So the Passover, you had one lamb for a household. The Day of Atonement came, you had one lamb for a nation. But John calls Jesus the Lamb that take away the sins of the world. And so now we have one lamb for a whole world. And Jesus was that Passover. Now we're going to look at particularly how the Passover related with the timing that's given to us in the Old Testament. The first thing that we have to realize, and this is where I'm going to use my marker board, okay, is that Jews counted daytime different than we do. Okay? When do we go from one day to the next day? At what time?
24 hours.
Well, 24 hours, but what time? They have 24-hour days too.
Is that midnight? Is it rolls over?
Midnight.
We have a better marker.
There's another marker here. I got one.
You got one? You need another?
That's not any better, is it?
Braden's got some.
Okay, I'll keep trying to do it here. Okay, so the Jewish people did not change the day at 12, okay? They changed their day at what time? Who knows? When they go from one day to the next? At 6 p.m. 6 p.m. And then the mid portion of the day was 6 a.m. Then 6 p.m. Then 6 a.m. 6 p.m. I think y'all are getting it. Okay. So from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. would have been one day. Okay? Is everyone familiar with that? It's important that we... Okay. Man, he's got enough here. We're going to find one that works. All right.
So 6 a.m., 6 p.m. is when they changed over there.
That is correct. Okay, 6 p.m. So that's important to know. All right. All right. And so we're just going to call this the 14th day. Now, what was special about the 14th day? That was at least the preparation day. We're going to call it the preparation day. Just y'all probably can't see that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You can see it? We're going to call it the prep day. Okay, this is the preparation day. Okay, and then this starts unleavened bread. It does say unleavened. I write like a third grader. I'm sorry. Okay, unleavened bread. All right. So that would start unleavened bread, and this is also a Sabbath, right? Okay, and then what would fall after the Feast of Unleavened Bread? This day, after this day, what would be the next day?
The 15th day, you're on?
Yeah, this next day. What would be this next day?
We're reading about it.
It should be first fruits.
Yeah.
Should be first fruits, but I'm going to build a case for you that this would have been another Sabbath day. as it relates to Jesus on the cross. And then this would actually be first fruits. Okay, so just stick with me. First fruits. Okay. All right. We're going to look at some verses real quick. Turn with me to John chapter 19, verse 31. And when you find it, just go ahead and read that for me. John chapter 19, verse 31.
Therefore, because it was the preparation day, that the body should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for the Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away.
Okay, so Jesus is crucified on the preparation day according to the Gospel of John. I don't think anyone's going to dispute that. I think we just read that. That's pretty clear. And they wanted to hurry up and get him off the cross because why?
The next day was the Sabbath.
The next day was a Sabbath day, okay? Which was called a high day. Now, why is it called a high day? A high day means it's a Sabbath that doesn't fall on the weekly Sabbath. So anytime you have a high Sabbath, it's a Sabbath day that could have fallen any time of the week, but it was proclaimed a Sabbath because of something they were observing, not because it ended up on Saturday. Friday evening to Saturday evening. Okay?
Because it was according to the
Yes.
15th of Nisan, not the weekly calendar.
Correct. So it was a high Sabbath because it followed the Passover, the 14th day. Okay? Everyone there? Are you not there?
Okay, keep going.
No. Oh, no.
Listen to this mess.
No.
Chuck, I've been interrupted by my kids so many times. I'm going to have to listen to it.
Ignore them.
Well, I know. I try.
What would be, like, what day of the week?
The Sabbath always falls on a Saturday. That's called the weekly Sabbath. Every Saturday was a Sabbath. From Friday evening to Saturday evening would have been the Sabbath.
So this is like the extra Sabbath for 3 times a year?
That is correct.
Okay.
Anytime that the Sabbath fell because of the Passover on the 14th day, it could be any time during the weekday.
Okay.
It would be a Sabbath. And that's why it's called a high day, a high Sabbath.
Okay.
It didn't fall on the Saturday. Okay? Okay. I told you I'd get you there. Don't bail on me. All right, so he died on preparation day. Crucified on preparation day. That's important. Now we're going to look at some timing things. Turn to Mark chapter 15, verse 25. I'm in Exodus. That's not going to work. And if someone would just read 15, verse 25, and then skip down to 33 and read verse 33.
And it was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him.
Huh? Say it real loud. Loud and proud.
It was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him.
Okay, 3rd hour, and they crucified. 3rd hour to what?
Mine says it was 9 o'clock.
It was 9 o'clock. But what is the 3rd hour to what? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at.
The 3rd hour of the day.
Between the twilight.
Yeah, it was, yeah. So from the day, from the starting of their day would be 3 hours. And when does their day start?
6 a.m.
Their actual daytime started at 6 a.m. I know this is confusing. That's why I wanted to clarify that. Okay? Because remember, Jesus says there are not 12 hours in a day. So there's 12-hour period that they call day, and there's 12-hour period they call night, even though the calendar day starts at 6 p.m. So that can be confusing. But 6 a.m. is when the time of day started. So 3 hours from that time is when it starts. Okay? And that is
9 o'clock.
okay.
Now we're talking about p.m.
9 o'clock a.m. 9 o'clock in the morning. Remember, the disciples are sleepy. Why are they sleepy? Because they just stayed up all night having a Passover. Right? And then they go into the garden. They're praying. They can't stay awake because they should be sleeping. All right? So we cut them some slack. Everyone's like, oh, why are the disciples falling asleep when Jesus needs them to pray? Well, because it's late. It's really late. It's nighttime.
Never put that together. Ever.
So now they're going into the daytime. Okay, so Jesus has been up all night. He's been tried. He's been found not guilty by a king and a governor. And he's still before his accusers. And Pilate's like, okay, just if you want to crucify him, we'll crucify him. You do whatever you want to do, right? And so he's been crucified. And that began at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now, read verse 33.
And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour.
And what was that? What time would that be?
That'd be 3.
3 o'clock in the afternoon. Isn't that interesting? That is incredibly interesting because that is the exact time when Jews would be sacrificing the lamb. He died at the very time that they would have taken their lamb and sacrificed it. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's why they want to hurry up and get this stuff done. They want to hurry up, get it done, because they had something they had to do at 3 o'clock. And they would take their lambs. Actually, on the 10th day, they would have already taken their lamb. It had already been inspected, been improved. It would have been kept. Then they would have taken it at this time to be killed. They would have then cooked it properly, ate it at the temple, and then they would have left. Okay? That's what they would have done. That's why they're hurrying up and trying to get Jesus off the cross so they can go and fulfill this aspect of the Feast of the Preparation. Jesus died at 3 o'clock, the same time that they would have sacrificed these lambs. Okay. Quickly. Luke chapter 9, verse 22. We're going to also look at dates, as in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Now, this is controversial that I'm going to get into. I think everyone's can put their big pants on, and we can deal with some controversy here. Luke chapter 9, verse 22. I know that most people believe that Jesus was crucified on a Friday. Okay?
Really?
I'm going to try to prove a case to you that he was not crucified on a Friday. I'm going to try to prove a case to you he was crucified on a Thursday. Okay? So we're going to get into that, and feel free to disagree, and that's fine. I'm just going to present what I believe is sound biblical evidence to support a Thursday crucifixion. Okay? So if you Luke chapter 9, verse 22, if you'd read that for me.
Saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and experts in the law, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Okay, so now we have that he's going to be raised on the third day. Now, John chapter 20, verse 1 clearly states that he was resurrected on the first day of the week. Anyone dispute that? First day of the week would have been a Sunday. He was resurrected on Sundays. Anyone disagree with that? I think most people will sign up for that. So we can now indicate that the third day that he would be resurrected on has to follow on the first day of the week. That has to be a Sunday. Anyone disputing that? Okay, let's keep reading. On the third day. Matthew chapter 17, verse 23. Don't turn there. Matthew chapter 17, verse 23 says the exact same thing that Mark did. Okay, but since we're trying to hurry through this, we're going to skip over that. I want you to look at Mark chapter 8, verse 31. Mark chapter 8, verse 31. This is interesting.
And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again.
After 3 days. So we had on 3 days, and now we have after 3 days. Is there a contradiction?
Same thing. It's saying the same thing, isn't it?
Well, they're not saying the same thing, but they all are going to point to the same day. So it's different ways of saying the same thing. Okay, as far as the end result, it just depends on how you calculate days. Now, before we get to there, now keep that in your mind. One person says on the third day, one says after the third day. Just keep your mind on that. But let's turn to the Gospel of Matthew and look at chapter 12, verse 40. We're going to look at a prophecy, one that you're very familiar with, I'm sure. Matthew chapter 12, verse 40.
For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of earth.
Okay, 3 days and 3 nights. So let's say that, just arbitrarily here, let's say that Jesus was crucified here. Let's make this the ninth hour, okay, or the time that he was on the cross, okay? So Jesus was crucified. Let's just make that squiggly line crucifixion, okay? In between that time frame. This would have been 1 day, right? Okay? Then this would have been 1 night. Then this would have been 1 day. Then this would have been 1 night. And this would have been 1 day. And this would have been 1 night. Y'all familiar? Y'all agree? 3 days and 3 nights. You have to have 3 days and 3 nights. That's specifically what it said. That Jesus was would be in the belly, or like Jonah was in the belly well, he would be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. Does everyone agree with that? Okay. 3 days and 3 nights. Now, for him to be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, then what day would this have to be? We know Sunday is when he resurrected, Sunday morning. Then what day would he have to be crucified to be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights? Would Friday work?
No, because it would only be.
It would not be 3 days and 3 nights. Now, here's the argument. People are well aware of that. I'm not showing you anything that they're not aware of. Here's the argument. The argument, well, you can kind of calculate days kind of arbitrarily, and a partial day can mean a day, and we don't have to have all the time to make 3 days and 3 nights. Okay, that's what they say. Well, they would make bad hotel owners. Now, the Jewish people, it is true that a partial day can be counted as 1 day. Okay, that is true. But you can't have a missing night and count that as a partial night, or that's okay. There has to at least be some form of night to have a night. But if you have a Friday crucifixion, you don't have a third night. It's not there. You have 2 nights and at least a partial day and 2 full days. Does everyone agree with that? So here's the other argument. What about when Esther fasts, right? And she goes before the king to plead on behalf of the Jewish people who Haman has gotten the king to pronounce an edict to kill them all, right? Kill all the Jewish people because they don't follow the same God. So she tells them that she wants to have them fast for 3 days, right? And then it says that she went in to the king on the 3rd day. And they were to fast both day and night. So that's the argument. They're saying, well, see, she didn't go 3 full days and 3 full nights. And it's okay that you can kind of just disregard 1 night. Here's the problem with that. She never said 3 nights. She said 3 days. And then she said both day and night. That night has to apply to the 3-day limit. There's 3 days. So within the 3 days, there would be 2 nights. She's just saying both day and night, they were to fast. And then on the 3rd day, she was to go in on the king. And there's nothing that contradicts her statement. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? I know there's a lot of distraction going on, moving parts. But are y'all following me? Not really, kind of? Okay. All right, so in order to have 3 days and 3 nights that Jesus said would happen, there has to be a Friday crucifixion. Also, in order to calculate this time from both Mark and Luke's and Matthew's perspective, you also have to have a Thursday crucifixion. Because you can't have after 3 days a resurrection. You can have on and after. It depends on if you count this partial day as a full day or not. If you count it as a full day, which they did, then it would be after 3 days. If you did not count the partial day, then it would be on the 3rd day. Both of them would be absolutely correct, but you would have to have Thursday in order to do that. So, why is all that important? Well, if Jesus was crucified on a Thursday, then we don't have to have this missing day that Catholics believe exists in the Gospels from the time that he entered into Jerusalem. And if you don't have to have that, and I'd like to go through the Scriptures, but I'm way out of time and people are distracted, so I'm just going to kind of just sum it up. It says that on 6 days before Passover, Jesus goes to have a dinner. This is in the Gospel of John. With Martha. Martha makes him a meal. Most biblical scholars believe that's a Passover meal. I agree with them. So that's probably on a Saturday. And then on the Sunday, you would have the ride into Jerusalem. Okay? And if that is correct, then you can count down the days from that day to the 14th day. That would make that Sunday the 10th day. That means on the 10th day, he presented himself to the people. They all said, Hosanna, Hosanna, come save us. And all recognized him among themselves out of the congregation as their Passover lamb. And then on the 14th day, went to the cross and died for the people that cried out, Hosanna, Hosanna, come save us now. All of it fulfilling this beautiful type. Now, if he's crucified on a Thursday, you have unleavened bread, which was a Sabbath. Then you had the weekly Sabbath to follow. Mary comes after this weekly Sabbath, not a high Sabbath, a weekly Sabbath, to find an empty tomb on Sunday. And Mary and John, they find the tomb to be empty. Being in the grave on the full 2 days of rest, on the day of first fruits, when you would have celebrated the resurrection, Jesus our first fruits, he would have celebrated on the exact same day that they would have had the celebration of the first fruits. All of the feast pointed beautifully and majestically, I may add, to Jesus, who was crucified for us as our Passover lamb. Is there any questions about any of that? I'm sorry that's so distracting here, but
No, I think it's a perfect time. I'm still not clear on what the distinction that you're talking about, the Catholics use for Thursday versus Friday.
yeah, well, they in order to calculate from Sunday there to the next, they say there's a missing day, what they call Ash Wednesday. And they basically believe that Wednesday is kind of a day that's not mentioned as they do the calculation of time. I could go and I was trying to hurry through that, and after we close, if you want to spend more time talking about that particular thing, I can kind of show you where the days are there's a missing day that they say is just not mentioned in the gospel as they calculate the time from that point to the crucifixion.
So what you're saying is on the 10th day, whenever Jesus came into Jerusalem and everything, that was kind of like them picking out the lamb
Yes.
for the sacrifice.
That would have been on the 10th day. I mean, also fulfilled Zechariah 9:9. It said that your king would come in on a colt.
The same way they would have done for the Passover when you sacrificed their lamb, and then he was killed on the exact time that they would have killed the lamb.
Exact time.
On the exact day.
Exact day.
Then he rose.
On the exact time of the first fruits. I mean, if God didn't say, listen, this is the Passover lamb to the Jewish people, I don't know how else he could have said it any better. I don't know what else he could have done. I mean, he filled it meticulously to the point. Any other questions?
Thanks for going through that. That's go ahead.
Well, it's maybe irrelevant. So the Jewish people who didn't believe that he was their Passover lamb, they go ahead after he was crucified and go continue on with their Passover?
Yes.
It's not even understanding.
No.
Kind of incredible.
It's incredible. This says the disciples didn't even catch it initially. It says later, when God revealed to him the significance of that, so they didn't even catch it. Anybody else? Any other questions? So I had to run through that so quickly. Maybe too much information at one time, but I didn't realize I was going to need so much more
I
time.
think you recorded it.
I did record it.
Maybe it's worth going through again at a later date. So.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, so we'll go ahead and close in prayer. Brother, if you don't mind, will you close us in prayer?
Sure. Dear Lord, thank you for this day and the time that we can come together and study your word. Thank you for the things that we heard tonight. Help us to go to your word and to gain understanding. And thank you for all your blessings for us. We pray for Matt and his family while they're on the road, that you can give them safety and that their trip can be a beneficial trip. Pray for Clint and Danette and their situation, that your will be done in their lives. That Clint, if he can have his health, if he can recover in his health, and we thank you for that. And if not, that you help us to rest in his will, and Clint can continue to rest and look to you, and Danette can as well. Thank you for this time that we can have together, and again for the study of your word. We thank you for the presentation that Trey put together for us. And in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.